What's up, everyone? This is the Nuts and Bolts Podcast, and I am your host, the One James, here with our lovely co-hosts, Airball.
Hey, everyone.
And Michael Kritz.
What'd it do?
And we're here to give you the nuts and bolts of the standard and pioneer formats each and every week for your listening pleasure, and maybe you learn a thing or two along the way. But first, let me talk to you about the sponsor of this podcast, CoolStuffInc.com. Using code James5, you can save 5% off of anything in the store, sealed product, singles, anything you could ever need in Magic the Gathering. They have it. Go save yourself some hard-earned money and go to CoolStuffInc.com. But first, I guess second, we'll start off with our upkeep, which is the jargon of today's episode. This is Alpha Strike, which is a final all-out attack for a lethal amount of damage intended to win the game that turn. A keyword intended. I've seen a lot of Alpha Strikes actually not deal lethal damage. I don't know if you, Airball, have done a lot of Alpha Strikes, though. I guess with a whole bunch of Shark Typhoon tokens.
What does it mean to attack?
Wow.
Why attack when you can draw cards?
Yeah.
Usually my opponents just scoop.
Oh my goodness. I've seen, Michael Kritz, you probably have done some Alpha Strikes in your day.
I have. Learning when to Alpha Strike is definitely a difficult thing that I still am always trying to figure out how to do properly or well, or if I should Alpha Strike the ones with where you're not doing lethal, but you just need to attack all. So it's Alpha Striking, there's a lot of hard lessons to be learned, for sure.
The hardest lesson is when you get Settle the Wreckage and exit the match. Flip the table. Exit out of arena. Do what you gotta do.
Mm-hmm.
Do not Alpha Strike into a Settle the Wreckage.
Mm-hmm.
Or just don't play around it at all. Anyways, that's our upkeep today. Let's go ahead and go over what this episode is about in our main phase. It's called Paint It Black for a reason, because not only is a mono red a topic of discussion, but it's an evil deck, but also we have another evil deck, some mono black going around, and also some black mid-range decks in Pioneer and Standard, featuring some new cards from the new set. So, we're going to go over some Pioneer tournaments first, go over a Pioneer challenge, we'll go over a little bit of Standard at the end, and then we're going to talk about what we would play going into this next week, on whether it's Arena, Standard, Pioneer, what would we play going into this next week, and hopefully you get some value out of that. Let's go ahead and get started in talking about a Pioneer tournament that I personally played in my regional championship qualifier. I played Rakdos Midrange. I made the top 8, which is pretty cool, for the 4th time in a row, but I also did not win for the 4th time in a row. That's a thing that happened. Played against one of my best matchups, Mono Red, in top 8, and I don't think I've ever lost against Mono Red in a tournament in person with Rakdos Midrange, and this is the time that I lost. Ember Cleave is a real card. I do want to let you folks know.
Isn't that the most frustrating thing? Isn't that the most frustrating thing? Losing to Mono Red when you have a good matchup against it?
Oh my goodness, that is so
Feels
frustrating.
good.
I know. Oh, you're not allowed to say it feels good, Michael. I guess you are.
I play lots of Rakdos. What are you talking? I've been disappointed by Rakdos a lot. I still rep the gang, Rakdos gang all day, so I don't want to hear it.
I don't know. I needed to draw my 3rd land, and I had like 4 turns in a row to do it, and I just could not draw my 3rd land. Oh, it's frustrating. But anyways, I'll get him back next weekend, I guess. But anyways, let's go over the top 8 of this tournament. There was 2 Rakdos Midrange, me and one other person. 2 Lotus Field, up from 1 from last week. So Lotus Field is showing its grasp a little bit more in these top 8s. 1 Esper Grease Fang, 1 Mono Red, 2 Mono Green Devotion, 1 Mono Blue Spirits, and 1 Bant Spirits with Collected Company and Spellqueller and Friends. So looking at this top 8 here, I'll start with Airball and go to Michael afterward. But is this kind of what you expected, or is this a little bit surprising? I don't know. Let me know.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit interesting. There's not a whole lot of blue-white control in this RCQ top 8. There also wasn't a whole lot of blue-white control anywhere else in other recent Pioneer tournaments, at least not in the top 8s. It's interesting to me that that deck has fallen off so much. Rakdos, I guess, has the tools to deal with it now. And you can see mono green in the top 8 too to try to prey on those Rakdos mid-range decks. So that at least makes some sense. 2 Lotus Fields are interesting too. That deck sort of fell off the map for a little while, but it's interesting to see that come back, and maybe that means there's some hope for blue-white control, because I think that's traditionally a good matchup for us.
Yeah, I love seeing Rakdos in the top 8s. That's like my favorite. And I'm curious to see how Shieldred has kind of breathed some new life into the deck, as far as like some part that's innovation and gives you some sort of inevitability once that's on the board, and you can kind of keep it alive. So I think that's pretty solid, because Rakdos's traditional weakness is top decks, and Shieldred makes sure that their top decks are very painful. We see the Lowe's field like you were speaking to. I don't know if it's more a reflection of your local meta, because I think you spoke into another Lotus field, another RCQ that you had. And like last week, I said that Lotus field is a deck check. Like, it can crawl its way up to top 8s and even win outright tournaments if people are sleeping on Lotus field. But if it is prepared for, then it usually ends up just tanking really quickly. The rest of the field, I feel like that's just Pioneer's diversity. The one Esper Greasefang, one mono red, the one mono blue Spirits, and the one band Spirits. We spoke about the mono green Devotion, no surprise there, obviously, but the rest of the field is just kind of like, that's Pioneer's diversity, and any weekend any of these decks can like win. So it's not surprising to kind of actually see the top two kind of what I think strongest decks: 2 Rakdos midrange, 2 mono green Devotion in the top, and then the 2 Lotus fields, like I said from last week. I'm not going to repeat what I've said. So yeah, the top 8 seems good.
Yeah.
James. Go ahead.
one thing I did want to mention for what you said about blue-white control is Lotus Field is a really good matchup against Rakdos, and Lotus Field against mono green is kind of like an arms race to who can combo first. And I think the presence of Rakdos and mono green being really good, at least favorable against blue-white control, means that blue-white control is a little bit less played, which opens the door for Lotus Field. But if Lotus Field does catch on a little bit more, it seems like it has. Maybe that's just my local metagame, or maybe that's in general. Just if you're going to be able to combo turns 4 or 5 in mono green, what is better against no interaction other than Lotus Field? And Lotus Field is already good against Rakdos, so it just seems like a really good meta call. But if people are shifting towards that, then I can see blue-white control being good again.
I do have a question for you about the Rakdos mid-range decks that are here. How many copies of Shieldred, how many copies of Liliana, or are they basically blasts from the past, the last format we had?
I personally played 2 Liliana. The other person in top 8 played 3 Liliana. I played no Shieldreds, and they also played no Shieldred. But they also...
Why didn't you play Shieldred?
I didn't play Shieldred because I didn't think I needed it. I thought that Sorin the Mirthless was better. And it ended up being better in the Swiss rounds when I played against the Mirror. Shieldred's pretty good in the Mirror too, but there's Fatal Push and Dreadbore and so many ways to deal with it. The 5 toughness is pretty difficult because it dodges Bloodtide Harvester half the time, and also dodges Chandra Torture Defiance's minus. So the 5 toughness is pretty good, but there's like so many copies of Dreadbore and Fatal Push and ways to deal with it that I thought that Sorin would be better, and Sorin was very, very good for me over the week. It was just a personal choice. I think it's personal preference whether one is better than the other. I personally think Sorin's better, but I can definitely see if you made an argument for Shieldred being better. I can see that too. We both weren't playing Shieldred.
I think quickly, like if you're gonna have Liliana, I think it's wise to have Sorin, because you're 1 for 1ing, but you also need to just like draw cards, and it also kind of like maybe helps you filter or something to the effect of. But I'm still like really surprised that people are still including Liliana in their Rakdos decks, because it just doesn't feel like there's a home there. But if it's working, it's working. I would rather, personal choice, have Shieldred over Liliana's in my deck, but if it's working,
it was really good for me. There was a period of time where I was super behind in the mirror match, and I had Sorin and Chandra on the board at the same time after I finally took control of the board. and I had Liliana as well, so I go Liliana minus, or draw a card for turn, play the card, Liliana minus, and then draw 2 extra cards every turn was just so powerful.
Yeah,
It's kind of cool that you said your alternate choice to Shieldred was Sorin, because Shieldred is good in the games where life total matters, and Sorin is good in the games where it doesn't. And I guess you have to make a meta call about whether you think you're going to be up against decks that care about your life total, or their life total, or decks that don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's also interesting too, because I actually like Sorin against decks that are trying to kill me, because your lifelink is amazing, and you can minus it, block with the 2/3, and if it doesn't die or whatever, you can minus Sorin again to kill the Sorin. But now your 4-mana card made 2/2/3 flying lifelinkers, which is really strong.
I feel like most people I interact with, they're like, "Oh, Sorin and your Rakdos deck." I'm like, I don't understand what you don't understand here, but lots of people like to hate on it. I'm just like, it's a good card. Like, it does things. It's really good actually. So
it also does 13 damage and gains 13 life. My opponent had in that same matchup in the same game had to waste a Bone Crusher Giant Stomp on my Sorin just to make sure they didn't die to the. It was just so much value. It was. Anyways, not that this entire episode. I mean, I could talk about Rakdos for this entire episode, but that's not what this is about. But I can definitely see Blue Eye Control coming back into meta if Lotus Field popular over the next coming weeks. But that's not the only tournament that we are going to cover. I do want to tell you the winner of that tournament was Mono Green. I'm not surprised about that. It's winning all over the place. Not surprised. Happy that my friend was able to win with Mono Green. Not even the first one of my friends that played Mono Green just to win the event and to actually play a different deck. They usually play Mono Blue Spirits, but they felt like winning, so they played Mono Green. But anyways, I digress from that. Let's talk about the Pioneer Challenge that happened at Magic Online. And let's go ahead, if you're watching on YouTube, switch over to actually look at this. The Pioneer Challenge was won by, you guessed it, Mono Green, of course. I think Nykthos is probably the best card in the format. I mean, Thoughtseize is really good too. I mean, it's definitely top 5 in the format, Nykthos. And of course, you folks already know that listening to this. But anyways, I'm just tired of this card winning, and it just keeps winning. That's what came in first place. If you're watching on YouTube, there you can actually look at the deck list. Second place came looks like a it's a Greasefang deck that plays 1 Liliana. It also plays a Tassiger, the Golden Fang, with your typical Can't Stay Away, Witherbloom Command, Grizzly Salvage, Asika's Chariot, Parhelion 2, Sky Sovereign, Console Flagship. So that deck came in second place. We see Unlicensed Hearse in like every single sideboard. This deck was actually playing 3 Graveyard Trespasser in the sideboard. Very powerful card, of course. Third place is probably the most interesting deck we'll talk about, and that is the Enigmatic Incarnation deck. 5 colors. It has a lot of cards that I probably don't have time to mention all of them, but now you have the added, if you listened to the episode last week, we talked about how Leyline Binding improved this deck, and it has taken another spot in a top 8 of a Pioneer tournament, and that Leyline Binding can be sacrificed to the Enigmatic Incarnation to fetch up 7 drops, and they've chosen Titan of Industry in the main deck and Agent of Treachery in the sideboard. So this is a super interesting deck that has gotten more powerful. We didn't get a chance to get Airball's perspective on this deck from last week, so what do you think about this deck?
I think this deck is so cool. I think it's going to be such a pain to play against in paper when you're tutoring stuff out every single turn. But I think this deck is so cool. The interaction between Leyline Binding and Enigmatic Incarnation and Agent of Treachery is just too good not to play. I'm not sure it's actually great. I'm not sure it's actually going to win anything. But oh my god, is it not fun? I tried to build this deck in Explorer, and I was ripping the Moto lists and trying to build it there. But like, low key, how good a card is Nilia's Presence in these domain lists? Like, I don't think this card has a good replacement in Explorer. It's this 2-mana aura enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, whatever. Enchanted land is every basic land type in addition to its other types. In other words, 2 mana, you have maximum domain for everything for the rest of the game.
Oh yes, definitely. That's the reason. The reason to play this card before the Leyline Binding even came out was so that you can fix your colors and you draw a card, and it's an enchantment that you can sacrifice to fetch all of the 3 drops in your deck. Whether you need to bounce something with Aether Channeler, whether you need Archon of Emeria against mono green, whether you need Callous Blood Mage to just make an extra blocker to live an extra turn against mono red, or maybe exile your opponent's graveyard to exile their Kroxa or something. Blastpool Mimic can copy anything that you have on board already. Gloom Shrieker can get something back out of the graveyard. Night of Autumn, you can kill an artifact or enchantment, maybe a Fable of the Mirrorbreaker that you need to get rid of because your opponent you don't want them to filter 2 cards out of their hand. Moonblessed Cleric, so that you can search up extra copies of Enigmatic Incarnation, or if you need a removal spell, you can fetch up a Leyline Binding if you want to with Moonblessed Cleric. Renegade Rallier is really good in this deck, especially since this deck plays Trial of Ambition, which makes your opponent sacrifice a creature. If you have Trial of Ambition, they sacrificed a creature already, and then you play Enigmatic Incarnation, sacrifice Trial of Ambition to get Renegade Rallier. Renegade Rallier says, when it enters battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, return a permanent with mana value 2 or less from grave to battlefield, so you can just return the Trial of Ambition again and make your opponent sacrifice another creature. The Skyclave Apparition, if you want to deal with anything else. There's just so many cards in this deck that have so much value. It's like the ultimate toolbox deck. There's a Scarab God in there. There's a Tolsimir Friend of Wolves in there. There's a Yorion in the main deck. There's just everything. It has one extra addition that we haven't talked about, is Sarah Paragon is in this deck as well, and this can just recycle all of your lands or enchantments that you've already sacrificed in Enigmatic Incarnation and bring them back to the battlefield. So just so many things you can do in this deck. It's just a matter of, can you live long enough to do it all?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, this deck is really hard to evaluate because the only choice you get with Enigmatic Incarnation is what creature you're going to put into play. So even though the deck has a lot of answers in the form of enchantments, you only get to put the creature into play. And so it really comes down to me to how good those creatures are at answering the board states that you're likely to run into. And we're playing some pretty poor Magic cards otherwise, right? Like, normally you wouldn't see Night of Autumn in the main deck. Normally you wouldn't see Tolsimir anywhere. And we're not really cheating any of these big creatures like Titan of Industry into play. We're mostly playing them fairly, because you need to play the high CMC enchantments and wait to get those into play in order to get your big creatures into play too. So it really depends on how good that creature toolbox is.
I have to stop you on that one, because Leyline Binding is usually always 1 mana in this deck.
Yes,
it has.
So that's the only way to cheat.
Yes, it's the only way. It's the only way to cheat it out. But there's 4 Leyline Bindings in here. And you can even search up Leyline Binding with Moonblessed Cleric if you already have Enigmatic Incarnation or hard drew the Moonblessed Cleric. There's just so many ways to get to it. One of my friends plays this deck, and he's winning a lot more with it now that Leyline Binding came out than he was before, because it's just so easy to just fetch up things in this deck and search them out. It's surprisingly way more consistent than you would think with all of these one-of creatures.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was seeing all the one-ofs. I'm like, that's spicy, but you're just kind of looking at your creatures as they're, like Airball said, like toolbox things, and then they're just they happen to be a creature on top of that. With, like, some have more stuff than just ETBs. They have things that they can do while they are just in the battlefield, and you go through phases. So
yeah, and this deck actually has the ultimate deck smoother of a card, Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. 4 copies. Yep. I told my friend to play 4 Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. He was kind of a little bit iffy on it. And I said, it's an enchantment, and it smooths out your deck. Like, okay, you have a point. He played 1 Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. I was like, you need to play 4. And he upped it to 2. He's like, oh yeah, this card's pretty good when I draw it. I was like, you need to play 4. And then he eventually played 4, and that's when he top 8'd.
I can't believe someone considered playing less than 4 Fable of the Mirrorbreaker in a red deck. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So it's really, really, really easy to get to your combo pieces and draws and your Enigmatic Incarnations and your Fires of Inventions when you have so much draw power in Omen of the Sea, Nalia's Presence. There's just so many ways to draw your cards, and it's pretty consistent, more than you would think. So outside of this deck did come in 3rd place, I believe, which is pretty high up there for a tournament like this. We have 4th place, which is Mono Red, and we're going to talk about this as a main part of today's episode. There's quite a few Mono Reds that have made it to Top Cut of these Pioneer tournaments and challenges and RCQs. I didn't think they would be able to do it since there's so much Rakdos midrange, but When Rakdos midrange is the thing, that opens the door for combo decks. And what deck chews up combo decks? That would be your favorite mono red. And I say your favorite because it's definitely not. But let's go ahead and go over some cards in this deck. And this specific build that came in 4th place, we have Anax Hardened in the Forge, Burning Tree Emissary, Eidolon of the Great Revel. You're probably like shivering, right, when I'm talking about these cards. 4 Fanatical Firebrand, 3 Karazev Skyship Raider, 2 Monastery Swiftspear, 2 Torbrand Thane of Redfell, 4 Bone Crusher Giant, 4 Play with Fire, 3 Ember Cleave, and 4 Kumano Faces Kakazan, and 23 lands, including 4 Den of the Bugbear, 2 Castle Embereth, 2 Ramunap Ruins, and a Sokenzan Crucible of Defiance. So, I thought this deck had a really bad matchup against Rakdos, and it's squeaking in past them to the top 8. What's your evaluation on Mono Red right now?
I like Mono Red. I really actually just like Mono Red in any format. I think it's a nice like deck check for decks to have early interaction and not to kind of just like fumble to their game plan. So I actually really enjoy that Mono Red is a thing. And I've played Mono Red decks like on Arena Ladder when I'm just like, I just need to like get to Mythic or whatever, and I just need to like grind games, and I just don't brain empty, attack, Alpha Strike.
Alpha Strike.
That's all I know. And you don't, there's not quite Alpha Striking like there's an Embercleave Alpha Strike. That just hit different. And so like if you've never believed in the Cleave and the Cleave believed in you, please just go out there and do it if you have access to it. It feels phenomenal. I just love Embercleave. Just the story behind the card, the art, the feeling of like, it's like pure aggro in an artifact. It's just, it feels so goddamn good. I'm not the biggest aggro head, but like, sheesh, like you play Embercleave, you don't feel right anymore. You gotta like, sometimes you like itch for it sometimes. So I dig it.
Jesus, Michael.
I'm telling you, you gotta let the Cleave wash over you.
Are we still talking about Magic here?
Oh yeah. You know, I got this thing in my bedroom called the. No, you know what's up? It's not the Cleave. No, we don't have to talk about that. We got a podcast record.
It's a different sword, yeah.
It's a different sword.
Anyway, my piece is said. I said
it.
Yeah.
We're on topic, right? We're on topic?
We're on topic.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Airball. We're talking about Mono Red.
I don't know how I'm ever going to top that. I do think that one thing that you should point out every time you talk about Mono Red and Pioneer is that there's really 2 main ways to construct the deck, right? There's like this brand that runs the sword that's in Michael's bedroom. With Torbrand and Annex and, big creatures. It's sort of like go big, mono red. And then there's like low to the ground, more prowessy stuff. I'm looking at the rest of this, and I don't see a whole lot of the latter. People are focusing more on the creature versions of mono red right now with the Embercleave, which is interesting because you'd think that would get blown out by the removal that's everywhere. But it is one of the best ways to get damage across if your opponent isn't interacting with you, and I guess that was something that mono red ran into in this particular challenge. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the way that I lost game 1 to Mono Red was they had an Anax. I knew they had an Embercleave. Because when they have an Anax, they have the Embercleave. Mm-hmm. You just know they have it. So I killed the Anax, and lo and behold, they had the second Anax. I couldn't out the second Anax, but I gave myself maximum draws to get the Thoughtseize because I just have to Thoughtseize the Embercleave. I know they have it. It's their only card in hand. What more could they have besides Embercleave that they have not played already? And I cycled with the blood token to try to draw Thoughtseize. I had one more black, my sweet, sweet black mana left over for my Thoughtseize off the top, and it was a Sulphurous Mire. That's not a Thoughtseize. And then I died to an Anax plus Embercleave.
I think one good thing I actually like in this deck, because like the hits for your 1-drops aren't that many. I think you have the 4 Fanaticals, you have the 2 Monastery Swiftspears, and then you have your, like, as far as permanents go, Kumano Faces Kakazan. And like anytime I get to play like Mono Red and Pioneer and I am playing Kumano Faces Kakazan, if I can like play on turn 1, it just feels so good. Like I'm just like, how do I lose? If I ever play 2 like in a game, I'm like, you're buddy, I don't know, you're done.
You're done.
it's so good. Like I don't. It just it's like very sneaky how good that card is, and if you can ever like really get that card going, it's a good time.
Yep, games 1 and 2, they had turn 1 Kumano faces Kakazan into
Mhm.
turn 2 Burning Tree Emissary Karazev. And then I
Mhm.
said, oh, okay, yeah, all right, good luck in the top 4.
Yep. People are like, you're not supposed to turn 1 Kumano. I'm like, I turn 1 that shit. That thing pops off.
All right, so we will get off the mono red topic for now. We'll probably revisit it, but there was a mono red that topped my tournament, and one that also topped this. So you must have this on your radar if you're going to play in a Pioneer tournament. Let's go to 5th place. This deck is, you guessed it, Lotus Field again. This is the third deck that has topped the tournament in Pioneer. Third time it's Lotus Field. We have Arboreal Grazer, Leer, Disciple of the Drowned, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, which can untap, as a creature, can untap your Lotus Field, and also it cycles to untap your Lotus Field as well. We have a whole bunch of cards that filter through your deck and get back from the grave. Balged Recovery, Behold the Beyond, a 7-mana card that says discard your hand, search your library for 3 cards and put them on your hand, and then shuffle your library. So you just search for your Emergent Ultimatum or your Hidden Strings or whatever makes you more mana and untaps those Lotus Fields. Emergent Ultimatum to get to all of your pieces that you need to eventually... I think this build specifically is playing a card in the sideboard that they search up, Approach of the Second Sun. They put it to the top. They cast it, goes to the top 7 of the deck. Then they cast Dig Through Time and get it to their hand, and then cast it again from hand with Omniscient play. That's how they win the game. There's one copy of Inscribed Tablet in the deck, and I've never seen this card before. Literally right now. It's a 1-mana artifact that just came out. You can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice it. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put a land from among them in your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you didn't put a card in your hand this way, draw a card. So it's kind of like a Chromatic Spheres / Expedition Map type card. But it doesn't actually search for the land. It searches your top 5 for a land.
It's like a weird ponder.
It's
almost.
Yeah, it's 2 mana to do it though. So it's like, it's not like amazing, but like maybe they needed like an extra copy of their land because they decided they wanted some more consistency in your combo deck. Who doesn't want more consistency, right? So this can add a little bit of extra consistency to try to get to your Lotus Field. But we've already talked about this deck a little bit, and that's it. That came in the top 8 here. Casting Approach to the Second Sun for game. So you definitely have to keep that on your radar for tournaments coming up in Pioneer. 6th place is Rakdos Midrange. This one is playing Shielded, 2 copies of the deck, and it plays 3 Liliana of the Veil. We have 1 Eliminate deck, 2 mana instant that destroys a creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. I guess that can kill your opponent's Liliana of the Veil. Also just kill almost anything in the mirror match. This card is interesting to see in this deck because you could be playing something like Heartless Act, but Eliminate does deal with things with +1/+1 counters on it, like in humans and things like that. Maybe even like a +1/+1 counter from Kumano Faces Kakazan in Mono Red. You can kill something like that as well. That maybe Heartless Act would not be able to kill. So, speaking to the Rakdos aficionado, Michael Kritz, what do you think about this build looking?
I like the one of Eliminate. I think depending on what the format looks like the one of Eliminate looks good if you're going against other Liliana. Like the Planeswalker part's what makes it super relevant. Like, yeah, you're tagging most 3 mana or less creatures, which is really pretty relevant in Pioneer right now. A lot of the big things you want to be doing is around that and around that mana range, and so does the Planeswalker. So I think that was a careful made decision and probably correct one that helped them get to 6th place. I really enjoy the Shieldred. We spoke. I don't know if we spoke about this live on the podcast, but I really like Shieldred as a card. I think it gives the Rakdos deck a little bit more inevitability because I feel like normally my weakness that I feel like I have in Rakdos all the time is you can't stop your opponent's top decks. And sometimes games drag out and you're just top deck war. So like at least Shieldred makes it painful for them. I still don't agree with the Liliana of the Veils. I don't know how to kind of really make that deck feel like it, or make that planeswalker feel like it's having good deck cohesion with the rest of the deck, but apparently people are jamming it and having success. So I'm still keeping my eye on Liana of like trying to get a good feel if it feels right. Right now I'm not quite convinced. So that's how I feel about most of this. And it looks like they have Reckoner Bankbuster in the sideboard, which is really interesting. I'm just looking at this right now and I don't know how to kind of process what made them have that decision. So that's my takes.
Yeah, to me, these Rakdos lists stand out because of what's not in them. None of these Rakdos lists in this challenge, flipping through them, have any copies of Chandra 4, Torch of Defiance. It looks like Shieldred has like just taken her place altogether. I have the 2 damage from in your opponent's draw step replacing the 2 damage from Chandra's uptick, I guess. But it's really surprising to me that Chandra's not there.
Yeah, I was playing Chandra, 1 copy, and Chandra. I keep saying Chandra. Chandra was absolutely broken for me. It's a removal spell. It's card advantage, inevitability. The only thing Shieldred doesn't have that same vein is the card advantage part. It is a huge creature, 4/5, and does provide inevitability. But like a tiny bit easier to remove in general, I think. You can't Fatal Push a Chandra. But I think this deck is going more towards black mana with the mana base, and be double red is a little bit harder if you are going towards black with putting 18 to 19 black sources in the deck in order to cast Liliana of the Veil, since that is a double black 3-mana creature. You do want to lean towards having double black instead of double red. You don't want any opportunity to cast Chandra that you can't cast Chandra, so maybe that is a consideration as well. But Chandra was really good for me. I have not played with Shieldred yet in my Rakdos lists, but I'm definitely not going to fault someone for trying to play it, and it seems like it's been doing pretty well. Well, here, there is a notable thing that I'm seeing here, which is a copy of Witch's Vengeance sideboard, and 4 copies of Extinction Event. Extinction Event is a card that I almost always want to draw against anything that's going to put anything on the board, whether it's mono white humans, mono red, Bant spirits. Since there's like a billion 3-drops in that deck, there's a billion 3-drops in the mirror match too. Extinction Event, you kind of bait your opponent into playing like a couple graveyard trespassers. You kill their 1/2 drop and then you Extinction Event. I've done that a couple of times in the mirror match, and it is amazing. It just game. There's just so many applications to this card. Not only that, but against mono green, every single card in their deck is odd mana, outside of maybe a token or 2 that they would make, but that's probably not the case. You can get the one thing that stops you with playing Rakdos against mono green is the Old Growth Troll and the Cavalier of Thorns. And if you can get rid of those, you can attack their planeswalkers down, but a lot of the time you can't because they are huge creatures that also get extra value when you kill them, and Extinction Event is very, very important in that matchup. Also just a very good card all the way around. One thing that's also not played in this deck, speaking of things that aren't played, is Kalitas. Not played in the main deck. There's only one of in the sideboard. So it seems like Shieldred in this list, at least specifically this one, Shieldred has taken the place of Chandra, Torch of Defiance, Sorin the Mirthless.
Yeah, the control player on me is hung up on your discussion of board wipes in the sideboard. Not only is Extinction Event in the sideboard, but there are 4 copies of it. That's I don't know that I've seen 4 copies of a particular board wipe in the sideboard of a deck that is not running any board wipes in the main. And you also have Witch's Vengeance on top of that. So, like, what does that say about how hard the matchup is against mono green otherwise?
Oh, it says a lot. The mono green is very, very difficult for Rakdos. Not impossible, but you do need a lot of exile removal, and you do need to get rid of Old Growth Troll and Cavalier Thorns in the game at all. And you never want to kill it, because you kill Cavalier Thorns with a Dreadbore or whatever because you feel like you have to, and they put a Storm the Festival from their graveyard back on top and cast it again and again. So it's just a lose-lose proposition if you can't actually exile.
Yeah, Extinction Event, like, if it were good against the field, it would be in the main deck. This player has decided that they need it against one specific deck. That's a pretty big concession.
I actually don't think it's for one specific deck. You want it for mono red anyway. You want it for mono white humans anyway. One of the problems with running so much 1-for-1 removal in Rakdos is that you actually have a hard time dealing with decks that go really wide, and especially decks that play a lot of 1-drops, because you don't play that many removal spells. I mean, you play a lot of removal spells, not enough to kill most of the creatures that that mono red or mono white or green white or whatever is going to play. So you need something that's going to gain you back the card advantage when they go super wide. Humans decks are starting to play Wedding Announcement and things like that to go wider against Rakdos because it is a problem for Rakdos. So that Extinction Event is a way to mitigate a deck's going wide against it as well. So I think it's really smart to play at least 2 copies, but 4 worked very well in this tournament for that Rakdos.
Yeah, Wedding Announcement is the answer to the question that I didn't get to ask, which is why Witch's Vengeance? Because Witch's Vengeance is only really good against the tribal decks, creature-based decks that Rakdos seem to me to already be good against. But Wedding Announcement's a pretty good reason to bring it in, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. Moving over to the next Pioneer deck, we're going to get to Standard in just a few minutes. If you are here for Standard, stick along. But we are going to talk about Arclight Phoenix now. This one actually made 7th place in this tournament. It's playing a card that I haven't seen in this deck before. It just came out, but it's called Founding the Third Path. It's a 2-mana enchantment that says read ahead. The first one is you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. The second one is target player mills 4 cards. So it does mill you your Arclight Phoenixes. And then the third one is exile target instant or sorcery from your graveyard. You may copy it. You may cast the copy. So not only is it like a pretty bad version of Snapcaster Mage, but it can also just do a whole bunch of other things for you. Later on in the game, it does cast whatever you want to cast in your graveyard, whether that's a Temporal Trespass or a Treasure Cruise or pieces of the puzzle. It lets you rebuy some of those, and also just lets you almost the first time you play it is almost for free, right? 2 mana, and then the first one is you can cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand that's mana value 1 or 2 that you were probably going to play anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this list of Arclight Phoenix?
There's more than one copy. Sorry, I just saw like Roast. I'm like, what the heck is this card?
There is a Roast in here.
Roast deals 5 damage to target creature without fly. Okay. That's the first time I've ever heard of Roast. No, I think this is really interesting with the Founding of the Third Path, and you can also, it's like a cheaper Galvanic if you don't want to pay. Yeah, you can Galvanic off of that Founding, so that works too. Which is actually a really cool thing. I think Founding of the Third Path is an interesting way to think about value in your deck. Like even from just a Magic standpoint of you can cast a 1 or 2 mana thing from your hand without paying its mana cost. I think that really just like it's hard to evaluate the value that can kind of bring, and then as well as the later clauses or later chapters that happen there. So I think that's really cool, and I think it's awesome with Young Pyromancer works well with that. Yeah, I just think this list is kind of really interesting, the way it's built, and it's kind of a little bit. I think it's thoughtful for sure. I don't think this was just like, I'm gonna test some cards out and experiment here. It feels like they have probably put enough reps and time to just really figure out the numbers in this deck, because Arclight Phoenix deck is something you really need to get those 3 spells off and need to get the birds into the graveyard. So I don't think it's kind of an accident that it made its way all the way to 7th place.
Yeah, you were talking about how they came to like very specific numbers in this deck list, and the one that jumps out to me is that they came to 4 Young Pyromancers in the main. This is a very aggressive Arclight Phoenix deck. This isn't like sit back and just eventually overwhelm your opponent by bringing the Phoenixes back over and over again. This is like get Peasy down on 2, make a big wide board state, force your opponent to deal with that, and then bring back the Phoenixes to finish them off.
Yeah, I think 4 Young Pyromancer, that's what thank you for going over that, because I was going to mention that as well. 4 Young Pyromancer, it really just seems like Arclight Phoenix is the backup plan that also wins them the game whenever that's necessary, but Young Pyromancer is also the win. So I feel like this is less all in on the graveyard, and I think you have to be in a format with Graveyard Trespasser in every single black deck, right? Graveyard Trespasser is so good against Arclight Phoenix that you just need another way to play the game. And also in game 1 especially, you want the Young Pyromancers in against Rakdos midrange. Probably one of your worst matchups, right? You want the Young Pyromancers in because, like I already said before, one of Rakdos midrange's problems is a bunch of 1/1s. It's really difficult, especially in the main deck, for Rakdos to deal with 8/1/1s attacking, and also having to deal with the Phoenixes, and also having to deal with the treasure cruises and going on. So a lot of card advantage in here, and also just a lot of ways to win. And I think that gives this deck the edge to be pretty good against almost any matchup. I still think it's an underdog, no pun intended, with against Rakdos, but I think young Pyromancer makes it a little bit easier against Rakdos. There is another. I want to talk about a little bit about a roast, and I think that's a concession for Shieldred. I don't think this deck actually can answer Shieldred reliably at all, outside of having a card that deals 5 damage, and roast does that with 1 card. Whether that is a concession for Shieldred or not, because you also have a lot of copies of Lightning Axe that also does 5 damage. So maybe that's just an extra way to deal 5 damage.
I really like, now that you brought that up, that Lightning Axe and Founding of the Third Path really work well together, because like you're discarding something, and you can Lightning Axe with Founding of the Third Path without having to pay that thing and still do 5 damage, and then you can, like, the thing that you discover with Lightning Axe, if you do that at like the 2nd chapter or something.
Yeah, it's actually true, right? If you do the first chapter, Founding the Third Path, you don't actually have to discard a card to cast Lightning Axe.
No,
you do.
I don't think true.
Is that not true?
You do. I don't think so. You can call a judge, but I'm pretty sure that you do need to pay the additional cost, because it says you may cast the copy, and then as an additional cost to cast that copy, you have to discard or pay the extra 5.
Well, never mind. We're wrong. It's okay. I think
still has good
right.
synergy.
It's still synergistic. Okay,
yeah.
You can give us a concession to that, you listeners that are watching on YouTube or listening on podcast. I should know what I'm talking about with this, but listen to Airball over listening to me. Okay. But anyways,
this deck is life advice.
This deck is super spicy. Hey, I see what you did there. This deck is super spicy. Try it out if you like Phoenix. Try out Founding the Third Path. Let us know how it goes. We're going to go over to the 8th place deck list, and then we'll go over to the standard tournament that we're going to talk about today. But the 8th place is we're not even going to talk about it. It's mono green again. We've already talked about it. It's Nykthos. It's Storm the Festival. A hard pass. Hard pass. You know what this deck does already. Is there anything spicy in the sideboard? I don't even know. Let's see. I'm not shaming mono green. I'm not shaming mono green at all. I'm not shaming mono green or anything. We talked about this deck enough. There's only so many times in Pioneer you can talk about mono green.
Yeah.
There's nothing in this deck that's different. There's one portable hole in the sideboard that maybe. Okay, wow. I talked about portable hole. There you go. I talked about it.
Cool. We're good. Yeah.
All right. There's some 9th place and 10th place decks too. There's another Arco Phoenix. There's another Rakdos. But it's basically the same things, same decks that we just talked about. But there is what we are a little bit of a takeaway from these decks. By far, the spiciest one is Enigmatic Incarnation, and you best believe I'm going to be playing that in the near. Let's move on to Standard. Standard tournament that we're going to talk about today consists of 32 players. 4 rounds, should have been 5, but it was. The top 8 is number 1, Rakdos Midrange, followed by Mono Blue Tempo, Azorius Control, there we go, Esper Midrange, Bant Reanimator, Grixis Midrange, Bant Festival, and Esper Midrange. So we've seen a little bit of a contrast of Mono Black from last week and different black-based midrange decks. Of course, there are still some in this top 8, but not as saturated with black-based midrange decks as we're used to. Maybe some green, white, and Bant decks are catching on in Standard. What can you tell us, Airball, I'll start with you, about this Bant Reanimator deck and the Bant Festival deck that we see in the top 8 of this tournament?
Yeah, so I think people have finally started to get tired of black-based decks in Standard. So the first thing I got to point out about this tournament, though, is that it's pretty small. It was free to play, and people maybe were more focused on playing decks that were fun than decks that they thought were good. That said, this Bant list is especially good against Rakdos. So we have a Bant Reanimator deck that is not running black, refreshingly. It's running 4 copies of Invoke Justice, so a pretty heavy commitment to white for a 3-color deck. But what you get for it is pretty impressive. You get 4 copies of Titan of Industry that you can reanimate with Invoke Justice that can often just win the game on the spot. 4 copies of Sanctuary Warden, which is a card that I've been really impressed with in this archetype in particular, because even if the opponent can deal with your graveyard, this is a perfectly reasonable card to just cast from your hand, and it's often, with the shield counters on it, very difficult for the opponent to deal with. We also have an interesting like enchantment sub theme to the deck. We have 4 copies of Wedding Announcement. We have 4 copies of Spirited Companion. And we also have 3 copies of Shauna Purifying Blade as well for card advantage and like recurring value on the board that Rakdos is not traditionally very good at dealing with. I think this deck is pretty cool. I'm interested in trying it, but for the most part, the cores does seem to be the Invoke Justice, Sanctuary Ward, and Titan of Industry stuff we've seen in the past.
I think that's
it is running 61 cards.
Is it playing 61 cards?
It's playing 61. It's got the old 61 card special.
That is how you know they're next level.
What do we think was the card that was really hard for them to remove to go down to 60? That's the real question, I think. When you're like, I've been to the 61 zone, and it's just like, what do I remove?
The fourth Lagrella the Magpie had to be.
3 just wasn't enough. You have to go 4.
Oh yeah, 4 Lagrella. They were really hovering over that arena button. They're like, I can't do it. Submit deck.
Yeah, two Bant decks here. Yeah, 2 Bant decks in the top 8. There's another Bant deck that played Storm the Festival, and this is more of a tokens style deck, I should say, as well. It's playing Teachings of the Kirin, it's playing Gallagreators, it's playing 4 copies of Sarah Paragon, Root Coil Creeper, a little bit of ramp involved here. It's got Workshop Warchief, King Darien, the XLV3, whatever that Roman numeral is, Aether Channeler, Shauna, AO, Spirited Companion, a lot of one-ofs. There's Undercover Operative in here, 4 Storm the Festival, 2 Wedding Announcement. There's a Tameo Completed Sage, there's a Wandering Emperor, there's an Elspeth Resplendent. There are a ton of one-ofs in this deck, and it's basically just a big festival of a deck. You open your 7-card hand to start the game, and you have no clue what's going to be in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. This isn't like another toolbox deck in the style of the Enigmatic Incarnation list. Look with all these one-ofs. If you don't draw Storm the Festival, then this deck is going to be super inconsistent, isn't it?
They made it this far in the tournament because they drew Storm the Festival.
Yeah.
This checks out.
And one day you won't, right?
Yeah, that day doesn't matter. This day they got 7th place in the tournament.
You know, sometimes you feel it. Sometimes you just run hot and your deck just like, people are like, man, deck busted. And then they just play and they're like, deck not busted.
I mean, Sarah Paragon does cast almost everything in this deck back from the graveyard. Yeah. That's another thing. There's so much value. You can, whatever spell you draw, whatever 4 or 5 mana spell in this deck that you happen to draw, because you probably don't know which one you're drawing, you're probably going to be able to cast it ahead of schedule with Gallagreators, Root Coil Creeper, and Llanowar Lone Speaker. There's 2 copies of Urborg. Can't say this name. Urborg Lurgoyf. I cannot say that name 2 times fast. I can't even say it 1 time fast to save my life. I have to think about how.
Bless you.
I have to think for so long just to say this name. But in general, I do think this style of deck, regardless of what you're playing, as long as the card that you're playing is powerful, and there are a lot of powerful cards in this deck, but this style of deck will be doing really good against the black-based mid-range decks. You'll go way over the top of them. All of their 1-for-1 removal is going to hit a Workshop Warchief that will give you a 4/4. It'll hit an AO that'll get you other things out of the deck. It'll hit a Spirited Companion that already drew you a card. Sarah Paragon, if you remove it, it probably already cast something out of the graveyard. There's just a lot of value, and it seems like a 2-for-1 party.
Yeah, it's like the defensive 2-for-1, which like Rakdos or any black-based deck is not a fan of like, well, you know, I'm 1-for-1ing you, and then you're like, well, I have like a defensive 2-for-1, so like, yeah, you can do whatever you want and interact with me, but it's just not gonna be efficient for you. So
right, and of course there's your suspects: Rakdos midrange, Esper midrange, another Esper midrange, and a Grixis midrange in this top cut. It wouldn't be a standard top cut right now if it include black-based midrange decks, but we wouldn't be able to get past this section of standard without talking about the 2 decks that are left here in the top 8: Mono Blue Tempo and Airball's favorite, Azorius Control. Mono Blue Tempo first because this one went undefeated as well. It's a Delver of Secrets deck. When was the last time Delver of Secrets went undefeated in standard Airball? I don't know, but this time it did. It has Tolarian Terror in the deck and Ledger Shredder as the only creatures. And Tolarian Terror is a card that is similar to a... What's the card in Modern that is I believe it has flying, that for every instant sorcery in your graveyard, It costs one less, something like that.
Murktide Regent.
There's a Murktide Regent, but it's a little bit
Yeah.
worse, and it's in standard Tolarian Terror, and that's the only creatures in the. There's 27 spells. First, you probably have to if you're playing Delver of Secrets. 3 Thirst for Discovery, 4 Spell Pierce in the main deck, 4 Slip Out the Back, 4 Make Disappear, 4 Fading Hope, 4 Essence Capture, and 4 Considers with 21 land. If this isn't mono blue deck to play, there's also no 3 mana mono blue card. The 3 mana X free flyer that makes all of your spells cost 1 less. That's not in this deck. Maybe you don't need it, and you can just go 4 Delver of Secrets, 4 Ledger Shredder, and 4 Tolarian Terrors.
I feel like just how this deck is built, I feel like definitely a Murktide player like put this together.
They played Modern before.
They're definitely a modern gamers because like just how this is built, it's very the flavor of it. Like I can just like I can taste what they tried to kind of chef up here, and so I think this works really well. Like works well with Ledger Shredder, works well with Tolarian Terror, it works well with Delver Secrets. It's like basically what you have for like modern Murktide. Delver Secrets is your Dragon's Rage Chandler, Ledger Shredder is just Ledger Shredder, and then you have Tolarian Terror as your Murktide. And then you have all these things that like cantrip a whole bunch, and then you have all these 1 mana interactions. And you just it feels like it can be very consistent. It's not like the creatures are powerful, but the spells are not. But because it allows you to have so much deck velocity, and then maybe you have such good early game interactions, you can use that to snowball and win the rest of the game, and your opponent just can't really have anything that sticks. So you finish the game out with Tolarian Terror and Ledger Shredder. So I really actually like what's going on here. I hate that I've become an Izzet player in Modern. I just hate it. I play Murktide now, a Murktide gamer, and I hate that I don't play Black, but like I'm getting a sense of like strong Murktide vibes of interact early, interact often, and have your creatures, out perform their creatures just because they came early and have high value as the game goes on.
Yeah, this deck is pretty interesting. The Delver lists obviously got seriously hurt by losing the modal lands from Zendikar. Having 20 islands in your deck that don't flip Delver hurts a lot. There's also this tension in the deck with Ledger Shredder versus counterspells. Like Ledger Shredder is obviously just a heroic card, but there's a lot of times in this deck where you're going to want to hold up your Slip Out the Back, your Fading Hope, or your Fading Hopes, your Essence Captures, your Spell Pierces, and you're not going to be pumping your Ledger Shredder yourself. And a savvy opponent will not put you in a position where your Ledger Shredder grows. So you can end up in this weird spot where you want to protect your Ledger Shredder, but unless you do something, it's not even really worth protecting. So it's interesting, but a good pilot, I think, can do well with it.
Yeah, I think that's what we saw here. This person definitely knows what they're doing with Mono Blue Tempo, and we definitely know for sure that their Devilish Secrets flipped. At some point in this tournament, their Devilish Secrets actually flipped. So congratulations to this person that flipped their Delvers, because I definitely can't with mine. Let's talk about Azorius Control. This one got 3rd place. It is playing, wait for it, Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh, Teferi Who Slows the Sunset, and Karn Living Legacy. This is the first time I've seen this card in the top 8, and it's here. It's Karn Living Legacy. Everyone thinks this card is bad, but Karn is here in 3rd place. There's 25 spells in this deck, 4 Wash Away, which is the counterspell that everyone thinks is playable in Commander. But there's Wash Away there. It's a 3 mana cancel, but it also costs 1 less if your opponent casts a spell from another area other than their hand. It's interesting. And then we have 4 March of Otherworldly Light, 4 Fateful Absence, 3 Disruption Protocol, 4 Depopulate, 4 Memory Deluge, and 2 Farewell. And it has 4 copies of Leyline Binding as a 2 to 3 or 4 mana flash enchantment that exiles. I'm not sure how big it can get in this deck, but let's check out the mana base. There's 4 Rafine's Tower and 4 Spara's Headquarters in this blue-white control deck to get the black mana off Rafine's Tower and the green mana from Spara's Headquarters to turn Leyline Binding on as early as... There's no red, right? But as early as turn 3, you can get Leyline Binding off. If my math is correct. There's 2 Odawara Soaring Cities, 2 Iganjo Seated Empires, and the rest are just white-blue lands. I'm going to let you talk about this Airball first, because you're probably excited to talk about this deck. But go ahead and talk about Azorius.
Yeah, this hurts me to say, but this deck is bad. Like, the first thing to point out is that there is no sideboard. Literally, they just sleeved up 60 cards and just ran that to a 3-2 finish, which I guess is pretty impressive. But I think you probably lose some value not having the sideboard available to you.
It was 3-1, right, for third place.
3-2 is what Melee is telling me.
Oh, that's interesting, because it doesn't tell me that. All right, it's telling me 3-1, telling you 3-2. Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
so you probably just like lost in top
sucks. Yeah, that's probably it. Actually, they probably went 4 rounds and they lost in top 8. But yeah, no sideboard. Obviously, it makes me not want to talk about the deck much anymore. I will point out that in addition, they're playing 2 copies of Tezzeret with no actual artifact spells. So the plus is always going to discard a card, which is awful. The minus on Tezzeret is never going to do anything, because the only artifact generators in the deck are Karn, which, even though it's apparently the centerpiece of the deck, is a 2 of, and Fateful Absence, where you'd have to target your own creature. And because you're never going to have these artifacts in play, Disruption Protocol also seems truly terrible. Like, it's basically just cancel at that point. I think this deck is terrible. I think it has no redeeming features. It's just board wipe tribal.
We've upset you, Airball.
Yeah, like I can't come up with a good thing to say about this deck, which I never thought I would say for a blue-white control deck.
That actually did well, right? This didn't scrub out of the tournament or anything.
No, it frustrates the hell out of me that I will play a blue-white control deck and scrub out, and this somehow top 8.
Let alone third after Swiss.
Yeah.
I was going to look at the bright side, okay, but Airball just saw no bright side at all.
No.
It's just the dark side. I guess that's fitting for the name of the episode. What do you think, Michael?
I mean, if Airball's off it, I'm way more off it. Like, and it's blue white. Like, yeah, no shot. And there's like, yeah, exactly. I was making a whole bunch of faces here because before, while Airball was talking, I was like trying to look like where are the artifacts in the deck until I forgot that Karn actually makes the artifacts, and then also I did clue myself onto Faithful Absence, but on your own creatures. But your own creatures were probably made via Tezzeret doing its thing, and then you have to kill it, and then it. I don't know how this deck functioned. I watching it,
maybe
your opponent. I mean, but Airball, I guess your opponent does concede because you haven't attacked them. Like, I don't imagine attacking. They've just got board wiped into oblivion. Like, their soul is clean from the board wipes. Like, they just have nothing to give and offer, and so they just concede. Because I don't see how else this deck wins. Like,
it's just ennui as a win con.
It's not. The win condition is board wipe your opponent to the point where their soul is frying, and then have a couple of planeswalkers on the board that are accruing the littlest amount of value possible, if any. And then your opponent looks at them and says, "I can't believe I'm losing to Karn, Living Legacy, and Tezzeret on the board, both doing nothing anyway," and then concede.
Yeah, the real victory is making your opponent quit Magic, not just the game.
Yeah, like you put them in so much of a bind that, like, I feel like this deck could easily deck itself out and do nothing to your like, and you just lose. But like, you just made someone so miserable. They're just like, I can't continue this. For
they activate their third memory deluge of the game, searching nothing both times, and then your opponent's like, "Wait, how many memory delusions have they cast? All right, I'm done here."
Yeah, done.
I mean, that's how I feel like anyway when I'm losing to regular blue-white control in Pioneer and things like that, but at least you cast a Fairy Hero of Dominaria or Wandering Emperor or something and actually start the game. But this is Orius controlled. Okay, we're dogging on it too much. Okay, this person has a family. This person has a Magic the Gathering Arena account. Okay, they put this deck together and got third place in this tournament. And regardless of whether they're playing a sideboard or not, okay, they did something good here. and doing what this deck is supposed to be doing and making your opponent concede. That is a win.
You're incorrect. This person who plays like this does not have family that will own them. They've been disowned.
Oh no!
They've board wiped their family.
Did we just? Okay. Oh my goodness! Is this podcast episode sponsored still?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. And we are going to wrap up today's episode with talking about the deck that we would play this week, whether it's Standard or Pioneer or both. We'll give a little bit of a reason why, very briefly. We'll start with Airball, go to Michael Kritz, and I'll talk about my own deck that I would play this week. What would you play this week, Airball?
Bant Control, or Bant Midrange in Standard, has me pretty excited. I think that people are starting to realize the power of the green-white shells against the Rakdos decks, and I don't think the Rakdos players have picked up just how good it is against them. I think this is the time to play cards like Wedding Announcement, Grafted Identity, Elspeth, Ren and 7 Storm the Festival, and take over the meta that way.
Yeah, for myself, I think if we're talking about Standard, I would like to play Mono Blue Tempo. I've been playing a lot of Is It Murktide lately, and even though I, hate that I have conceded and played that deck, I've been enjoying it nonetheless, and I think Mono Blue Tempo looks like it has a lot of the same flavor going on, and so I've been liking a little Murktide spice up my life type of thing, and I would probably just try and do some of this Mono Blue Tempo in Standard.
I'm going to be the person that continues to play black. I'm going to play Mardu midrange because I love Sarah Paragon and I love Fable of the Mirror Breaker. I love Blood Tithe Harvester, and I want to play them all together. Give me some Wedding Announcement, give me some Shieldred, give me some Wandering Emperor, and then let's all bring some stuff back out of the graveyard. So going into Standard, that's probably what I'm going to play, but I probably will also play that Bant midrange deck that Airball's talking about because it just looks super fun. I played it already for my own personal YouTube channel and on Twitch, but it was super, super fun. Grafted Identity, stealing your opponent's creatures, so satisfying, especially when they can't out their own creatures and they lose to them. That's the reason. That's what I will be playing. That wraps up today's episode of Paint It Black. Thanks for hanging out. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you are watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this on a podcast, feel free to give us a follow. Follow us on Twitter as well at Nuts and Bolts Pod on Twitter. With that said, we'll see you next week, and we'll also see you in the top 8.